remarkable panel. Vidya Shah, our first panelist, is the CEO of Edelgive Foundation, the philanthropic initiative of the Edelweiss Group, one of India's leading diversified financial services groups. Over the last decade, she has steered the growth of Edelweiss's social investments to develop Edelgive Foundation into a strategic philanthropic organization. In addition to being a non-executive director at Edelweiss, Vidya also serves on the board of various prominent CSOs such as the Agastya International Foundation, the Janagana Center for Citizenship and Democracy, the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy, Mandeshi Foundation, and the Indian School of Public Policy, as well as, of course, the ICC. She's also been recognized as India's top 100 women in finance by association, the International Wealth Management of India, in 2019. Vidya earned an MBA degree from IIM Ahmedabad and spent the first 11 years of her career in the field of investment banking with companies like ICICI, Peregrine, and NM Rothschild. That's quite an accomplished panelist that we have to start things off today. And our second panelist, Mridula Ramesh, is no less. She's someone I admire very much, and I insisted that she be part of this panel as well. She's an active clean tech angel investor with over 15 plus deals in waste management, renewable energy, as well as sustainable mobility and agri-tech. She's also the author of the critically acclaimed The Climate Solution, India's Climate Change Crisis and What We Can Do About It. It's a seminal fundamental book, and if you haven't read it yet, I urge you to do so. She's the executive director of Sundaram Textiles, focused on sustainability, including renewable energy investment, energy efficiency programs, water and waste management, and the circular economy. And she is the founder of Sundaram Climate Institute. Sundaram focuses on last mile research and education in water and waste. Their studies include waste and water realities of 2,000 plus households on urban waste and water, as well as groundwater impact, and the intervention of tanks, tank functionality, and organic and plastic waste solutions. And I think she's going to talk to us a lot about that in the context of resilience today. We're also joined by one of the most respected experts in the field, Mr. Girish Sohani, who is the president of BAIF Development Research Foundation. He's an IIT and IIM graduate. He's worked on rural livelihoods, tribal development, and rural value chains, as well as natural resource management, farmer organizations, as well as having conducted applied research on S&T for rural development over the last 40 years. Presently, he is the president of the AIF. Our moderator today, last but not least, is someone I respect immensely. Ganesh Neelam is a fellow colleague at the Tata Trust, and he presently leads CINI, the Tata Trust's flagship initiative, the Central India Initiative, focusing on enhancing livelihoods of tribal communities in Central India, which is executing the Lakhpati Kisan or Smart Village Focus Program. And he's also supervising key thematic programs within energy, such as clean cooking, DRE for livelihoods, which would create a large-scale positive impact for rural communities. Apart from his role as the trust, he's also the director of the Foundation for Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship, or FISE, which focuses on technology-based innovation. So with that, let me not take any more of your time. Let me hand it right back to Ganesh to start off today's conversation. Over to you, Ganesh.
Thanks a lot, Shloka. First of all, I would like to thank all the three panelists for being on the panel and agreeing to be on the panel for about an hour's time. What basically we'll try and do is we have about an hour, so 1 p.m. is the time that we have. And what we will do is we'll have some quick questions to three of you one by one and see that we try and have about 15 minutes for each one of the panel members to talk about their practical experiences, their thoughts in the space of climate resilience as well as smallholder farmers. And then accordingly, we'll have about 15 minutes for the larger group to have some questions, which we would request the panel members to respond to. With that, basically, we'll start with Vidya. Vidya, as you are leading the Edelgive Foundation, and Edelgive Foundation, as we know, focuses a lot on vulnerable communities. We would like to understand from you in terms of how you look at smallholder farmers, whether they fall in the vulnerable community, and if yes, why basically do you think that smallholder farmers are basically the vulnerable communities? And also with that, if you can give us some strong practical responses in terms of Edelgive Foundation working with smallholder farmers and addressing some of the challenges that these smallholder farmers face, and with the COVID situation, which has again aggravated. So over to you, Vidya, on the first question.
Thanks, Ganesh, and thank you, Shloka, for having me. I think just to set the context, I think ADG started working around the issue of agriculture and smallholder farmers rather late, in its 12-year history. We started out looking at livelihoods more from an employability and job creation lens. But our early experiences showed that we truly did not have the capability, nor did we find perhaps for the right non-profit partners who we thought could create meaningful change when it came to skill building and job creation. So we actually came into the issue of smallholder farmers through the lens of water. We started looking at water actively, and we started looking at the rural part of India very, very actively somewhere around 2012, 2013. The agrarian distress, particularly in Maharashtra, where we had a large part of our work at that time, was very, very apparent. We still see that distress, largely, caused by tremendous dependence on rain-fed agriculture. And naturally, therefore, our lens turned to the smallholder farmers as we find that though GDP contribution by agriculture has been falling, unfortunately, the number of people still dependent on agriculture is still very high in the hundreds of millions of people. And in addition, I think a large part of that community is actually focused, has small land holdings, and a large part of their livelihood is actually for sustenance and therefore on basically survival. We also started looking at it from not only from the lens of what water could do to and water related initiatives largely driven by community could do to more a resilient practice of agriculture. We also found that was inadequate. You really needed a more multi-dimensional approach, but we felt that the community had to be at the center of it, and therefore chose as partners people who understood that. Some of the great examples of what's really worked in terms of our practice. Large organizations like Orissa, which has looked largely at smallholder farming from a half-acre model, because they believe that large numbers, with the fragmentation in land holdings, we have to find creative ways of enabling not just food but also nutritional security, and really go back to not only just traditional practices around growing the right crops given the climate, water availability, and soil quality, but also looking at how we can strengthen communities to bargain for better prices. So, and the best example there we find is of Vritti, which works in more than 5 states now, which is used for, farmer producer organizations and collectivization as the methodology to ensure that there is education for farmers around the right seeds, soil testing, but more importantly, creating those market linkages to ensure that collectively the price that farmers receive is better than what they would have had independently. Similarly, in topographies which are not naturally tuned to agriculture, like Gravis in the Thar desert of Rajasthan, looks at arid zone oriented agriculture and works very closely with ICRISAT and ICAR and organizations like that to ensure that it's not just about, getting farmers, because there is a lot of traditional knowledge out there, but how do you harness that and then you bring in, crop selection, timing, water, and a whole host of other things with the community at the center. And I think that has been our real focus.
Thanks a lot, Vidya. That's very helpful. With that, I actually would move to Mridula, because a point which Vidya also emphasized strongly was with Edelgi Foundation starting with water, and the book which Mridula has written, The Climate Solution, India Climate Change Crisis and What We Can Do About It, talks a lot about water and how traditional irrigation systems are currently under non-maintenance. So Mridula would basically like to understand from you 2 points which have come very strongly in your book. One is on water, the tanks ecosystem, and how you see their non-maintenance is impacting the small farmers. And the second being on the small farmers mostly being dependent on informal credit even now, and how basically it prevents their ability to take on adaptive measures vis-a-vis livelihoods. So if you can throw some light on that, would be very helpful. Mridula?
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you, Ganesh. I think Vidya set it up very well. I'm actually working on my second book, which is on water, which is where tanks comes in. And what really struck me is I just finished the chapter on the 1876 famine, which is the forgotten famine of India. And I don't know whether we should, the thing that makes you feel very positive, which is because of the work that my fellow panelists have done, is that we've not had the millions of starvation deaths. Even though the 2015-16 El Nino was about, depending on which study you look at, about as powerful as the 1877 El Nino. Okay, so that's something we should take hope from. But what I think tells us we have a long way to go is that the plight of the small farmer is not that different when we look at his credit sources or his access to water from 1877, right? So I think those two stand in really clear contrast. So let me start with informal credit, and let me talk about, just before this, I have a foot in the textile industry, and one thing that the textile industry is grappling at is the return of migrant labor back to the rural economies. Now, let's not forget the migrant labor returning means that one steady stream of cash flow is going to go away, right? And when that happens, the dependence on informal credit becomes that much higher. When I've spoken to a number of, just before this call, I just refreshed my knowledge by talking to a number of my investee companies also. There is no collateral, right? There is, if you look at a small farmer, he'll be in a lungi and a banyan, and it doesn't really inspire confidence to lend. And let's not forget that the bankers, like for the bank officer who's the frontline lender, he's on, with the increased focus on NPAs, if he doesn't collect, he's on the hawk, right? Whereas if he lend, it's really a risk. And what really distinguishes informal credit, which is what I've learned, is it's available at the doorstep of the farmer at any time without collateral. But it comes at a very heavy price. It offers these benefits, but the trade-off is the farmer is basically will take whatever the petty merchant, who usually extends the informal credit, gives. And one of the biggest problems of that, which is what we found in cotton farmers, this I'm talking, CITI is actually the Confederation of the Indian Textile Industry. And they worked with over 70,000 cotton farmers in Rajasthan. Again, what Vidya mentioned, it's a rain-scarce region. And what they found, one of the things they found is the admixture of seeds. And this is something that anybody who works with farmers, if you have a seed, one group will, sprout, exactly, I think, if one group will work best in 90 days and another group works in 120 days, and you optimize your water for the 120 days, you're going to lose the 90-day seeds, right? So no matter what you do, the yield is going to come down. So that is as far as the informal credit is concerned. One way, I think, again, Vidya's already mentioned it, is the collectivization. I don't know whether you want me to talk about startups here or later, but there are definitely issues in how we channel credit to this group. And there is some real problems, but there is a lot of, attention that needs to be given there. And, the model that I think I've sort of become repetitive in this, it needs to be an economically sustainable model, not just for the informal farmer, for the smallholder farmer, but for the person who's extending credit also. It needs to be economically and financially sustainable on its own. Okay, and there are models there, they need to be scaled up. I don't know if I have time to talk about water, but
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, now about tank systems. Okay, so our experience in our institute is studying the rural, peri-urban and urban tank systems around Madurai. Now, if you look at rural tank systems, many of them tend to be very functional still. The break in functionality comes when the larger farmer gets access to bore wells. Now, if you look at, again, when I looked at the political economy of water and the green revolution, the larger giving free electricity, okay, is a very large farmer helpful thing. It doesn't really benefit smaller farmers because they don't have bore wells. But the moment a larger farmer has a bore well, his incentive to start maintaining the tank system goes down. The moment his incentive to start maintaining the tank system goes down, many of these tank systems tend to be cascading tank systems. So the larger farmer always owns land adjacent, next to the tank or next to the upstream tank. So when he stops maintaining, the cascade starts to fail, right? And all the smallholder farmers either they're far away from the tank systems or they are in the downstream. Okay, and I'll just, Viraj, if you can tell me how to share screen, can I go ahead and share screen? I'm
yeah, Mridula.
so
yeah, just click on share screen on your screen.
Okay, so I'll just start, because this is on climate change. I'm just showing, one slide. I don't know if you can see this. This is the rainfall patterns, right? One of the biggest trends of rainfall patterns that you see in climate change is the fall in the number of rain days. And, all these blue arrows are the number of rain days, coming down. Already India is an outlier in the few number of rain days in which our rain falls, right? I think 75% of India's rainfall falls in 100 hours. So tanks are like ideally suited to stretch out that rainfall. So if you start hitting tank systems, you start hitting water access, even soil moisture to the smaller farmers. And this, for anyone who works in Maharashtra, I think nothing else really shows up, how water can hit the small farmer. This is onion price, okay, over the last 20 years. And the volatility is a direct function of water volatility, right? This just shows this is a beautiful chart that's showing how storage is broken, how credit access is broken. He can't store, he doesn't have storage where he can protect. He doesn't have market access. So we can talk about everything else, but if you don't solve credit and you don't solve water, I think those are the bottleneck issues in my opinion. But so that's what I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Mridula. That's very helpful. And these are two important, issues within the larger ecosystem that the smallholders normally have a problem in. I would now move on to Sohani sir. And Sohani sir, because BIAF has been working on this issue for decades, there are a lot of experiences and models that BIAF as an organization has been able to develop over the years. What my request to you would be, if you can try and link it to the COVID-19 crisis in the geographies that BIAF works in, and basically see how it is reflecting in the linkages of COVID-19 affecting smallholder farmers in terms of agriculture and other issues, looking at the climate impacts in some of the geographies that you work, and the distress that one is now seeing between the rural and the urban migration that is now also in a way trying to go back into the rural areas. So Sohani sir, if you can throw some light on these pointers, it would be very helpful. Hello, not able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Ganesh. I think this whole issue of the situation of smallholder farmers and how it is been connected to distress migration in the past and how the climate change effect has been affecting it, and then now the COVID-19 pandemic, how it has further affected it. I think there is a lot of interconnection between all this, and we must understand it from the interconnectedness. As we all know, smallholder farmers, when we look at their situation, we face a situation where there are a large number of interlocked factors. Water may be one, a bottleneck at certain point of time, credit will be a bottleneck at certain point of time, but very often once the one bottleneck is sorted out, there is another which emerges. And for a smallholder farmer, there are a large number of them which are interlocked. So one has to go in for tackling in a multi-dimensional way and look at the entire gamut of things which constrain a smallholder farmer. So it is relating to smallholders have very high productivity by area, by unit area. But if you look at the labor productivity is one of the lowest. So you have low labor productivity. You have a situation of not producing enough for the whole year, and therefore there is a need that it does not provide a sustainable livelihood necessarily, and there is a dependence also on non-farm sources of income. And the dependence on non-farm sources not only is in the rural areas, but increasingly there has been an effort to get these sources located from urban areas, from the industrial sector, from the service sector. So that has been the reason why there has been a push out of rural economy and a connection or a migration which has been triggered by distress within the smallholder setting. Now, what has happened is with the climate change effects that we are seeing over the last few decades, I would say, where they have got accentuated, the climate change has given a harder push to this whole movement towards the urban areas, towards industry, towards employment in industry, employment in service sector, and that harder push has come because of the larger vulnerabilities that have been imposed because of the climate change impacts. And those vulnerabilities may be because in terms of changes in the factors of production like high temperatures, changes in the precipitation pattern, for example, the number of rainy days going down, but also extreme events taking place, the weather being unpredictable, so that the reliability of agriculture has gone down. So it is all these factors which have given a harder push for the farmers to become more dependent on beyond their individual holdings. And the COVID-19 effect has really come as a big blow to whatever was happening as a trend in the last 3 decades or 4 decades of migration from rural to urban. So we have the COVID pandemic leading to a situation where the employment possibilities in the industry and the service sector are blocked now, because all that has come to a standstill, all that has come to a stop. The economy almost has come to a standstill, and the problems of the rural areas of the smallholder farmers remain as they were. So the smallholder farmer, in fact, now, who was always a part-time laborer, who was a seasonal migrant or a longer-term migrant, now finds himself between the devil and the deep. The smallholder economy is not sufficient, and the roadways or the pathways that were emerging in terms of service sector opportunities, industrial sector opportunities over the last 30, 40 years, that has now been blocked. So we are in a situation where, and that is the reason why we see a reverse migration taking place in a major way. And the reverse migration is probably leading to other sets of problems and other sets of opportunities. For example, the reverse migration we know is also leading to a possibility that all these people are going to come back and going to seek their livelihoods from again the agriculture sector, which is not going to happen. So there is going to be a lot of pseudo employment in agriculture that is going to happen. We will think that, okay, 20% increase in people absorbed in agriculture, but are they really earning that much more production? Is there more production? No. Is there going to be more livelihood that is going to be generated because of that? No. So this has to be channelized. Otherwise, we will go into a situation where agriculture already it has a very small share in the GDP. We will go into a situation percentage-wise it will go up because the rest of the GDP is going to come down. But it is not because the cake has growing, and it is not because the people who are coming back to the rural areas are going to contribute to growth of the cake. So we have to really look at what else needs to be done to tackle this problem that is arising out of the pandemic. And there are a lot of possibilities. Maybe I can come to that in a while.
Thanks a lot, sir. I suppose those practical experiences help a lot to understand, and we'll come back to you on some more such examples for us to focus and work on. I move back to Vidya. Vidya, you spoke about initially focusing on water and then moving towards understanding the other aspects which are linked to a smallholder farmers. And one of the important pieces that you mentioned is community-led. Vidya, if you can help us understand more in terms of how Edelgive Foundation looks at a community-led approach And what have been your learnings across different geographies that you work or support partners in? This collective or community-led engagements actually showing the pathway for us to go ahead. So some strong learnings from that element would be very helpful for us to understand.
I think, like I said, I think being community led has been an integral part of our approach in terms of choosing the right NGOs to work with. So whether it's Gravis with Vritti or Pragati or Manu Vikasa in Karnataka or several of them, I think that has been, they have deep connections and understanding of the communities that they work in. Because we found that the solutions actually exist within communities. There is a traditional knowledge already sitting there, and unless that is harnessed along with using their capabilities, skills, uh, and the skills and capabilities that the NGO brings, it's going to be difficult to make these programs sustainable, because at some point these communities have to become resilient and they have to hopefully become as climate shock, protected as possible. And we've seen that happen. Like last year, when we had a terrible flood and a cyclone hitting Orissa, a lot of the Pragati communities could actually come together and help each other tide the crisis. Even in the current COVID crisis, communities have come together to ensure that a lot of their produce is not working with district officials to open markets in a very careful and thoughtful manner, and giving a chance to every farmer to come on a rota basis to come and sell his or her produce. I think that has been something that communities, and along with a lot of information sharing using the radio and other mechanisms to talk about safety and sanitizers and all of that. So I think being at the center of the community is very, very important for us. The other thing we found is that in terms of soil health decisioning, crops. For example, Pragati has gone back to and worked with the Orissa government to create a millet mission, because we believe that it's not just about food, it's also about nutrition. And how do we ensure that we grow what is best for the communities and the broader populations, that they serve? So really doing a lot of research on that, convincing other farmers, and making decisions based on climate, soil, water availability, and, on a more broad. So I think our learnings have been that when community is at the center of decisioning, inputs from the right partners, there's a high likelihood that communities start becoming resilient and they're able to overcome this. That's what we've seen in Tamil Nadu and Pudukkottai and other places, with even in the middle of Madhya Pradesh, really looking at bringing communities back. I think that has been one of our biggest learnings. We've seen that even in the Thar Desert, where women farmers have started playing a very, very active role.
Great. Thanks, Vidya. You touched on that point. I was actually going to ask you, when normally one says community led, it because it's smallholder farmers, it's mostly tended towards male farmers, even if they have a small land holding. Just to understand some thoughts from you, women, again, among these smallholder farmers, women become more vulnerable in the community as you go. So as Edelgive Foundation, how have you looked at the women leading that pathway on ensuring that they and their family with the smallholder farmer community is actually showing a pathway to the larger environment? So some focus and also some experiences that you have in this space.
So we've actually in Vritti, we found that there are 2 or 3 CEOs that are actually women farmers. So there is a beautiful case study that we quote, very often, of this woman called Shakuntala, who runs one of these FPOs. Now she is not even literate, but because of the kind of handholding that happened, and there's a lot of focus on women farmers, because women do end up spending a lot of time on agriculture. I mean, they have to unfortunately multitask, and a lot of their time is actually spent, and it's unfortunately unrecognized and invisibilized. In Shakuntala's case, I think she has actually brought together 500 other women as part of the FPO. It's almost entirely women-led. And I think their ability to kind of make, if I can say so, more humane choices in terms of water sharing, in terms of market linkages, in terms of access to the seeds and other knowledge. It's been really fantastic to see. And even in the Thar desert, in the when we with Gravis really worked on ensuring that the right water structures are used, so that the Khadin structure, for example, is best suited to arid soil, and how women have actually used, because there's a broader moistening of the soil that happens, so to use adjacent areas to do vegetable farming, and women have been at the center of that. So I think it's been very gratifying to see that when we talk community, we talk about it very, very holistically, and actively encourage women's participation in a lot of the decisioning that happens.
Thanks, Vidya. That was very helpful. And as we also understand from the experiences within the trust, it is actually the women who will be the front runner in most of these actions which may be required, say, for climate adaptation and somebody else. I would now move on to Mridula. And Mridula, you gave a small hint of about startups and entrepreneurship, and you yourself being an angel investor for clean tech. Would like to understand how you look at entrepreneurship and startups, and some of these startups addressing the issues that the smallholder farmers face. And also, when you look for investments, how do you also look at them actually impacting the last mile in terms of, say, livelihoods or their development, while they're also looking at entrepreneurship in a big way? So, Mridula, if you can throw some light on this space of startups basically helping the larger space of livelihoods for smallholder farmers as well as resilience would be helpful.
Thanks, Ganesh. I think what my fellow panelists have also said, and what anyone who works in this space understands, is what needs to be done is shifting the equilibrium in which the smallholder farmer finds himself or herself, right? And I'll go back to chemistry, where when you need to shift an equilibrium, you need a catalyst, right? When you need that catalyst, can be any number of things, right? It can be an NGO, very often it is. And it can be a big corporate, right? Sometimes that's also the case. Sometimes it can be a startup, right? So there are a number of reasons. I mentioned economic sustainability, in a sealed system, and that's how I find startups to actually help. But many startups that I work with, especially in the agri-tech space, always work in conjunction with an NGO. So it's often a hybrid model that works, because if you go back to finance, there are certain activities where the financial modeling or the funding model is better suited to an NGO. There are certain activities where the financial model is better suited to a startup. A given entity, a startup trying to do everything or an NGO trying to do everything, is less optimal than the two things working together where they each optimize their own financial model. So that's the short answer of where that's coming from. Having said that, what are the examples of startups or corporates working in this sector? I did mention the city working with 70,000 farmers in Rajasthan. They managed to get the yield up by 50%, right? 400 odd kilos to 690 odd kilos. And they did that by working with the farmers, getting the knowledge to the farmers, sometimes dragging along the bank officers in terms of funding melas so that they're exposed. That's one way to do it. Another startup that I talk about in my book also is Ergos, which I mentioned to you. They work in Jharkhand. They actually have rented out warehousing space and they manage storage. So they get losses from 25% to 5%. So that's a huge bump up for the farmer. But the killer proposition there is any stock that's there becomes active collateral for the farmer, right? And they've tied up with public sector banks. Look, I'm not going to fault the public sector bank official, right? His backside is really on the line if he does not collect. So now that if he has a nice shiny certificate saying, look, I have certified that the stock is actually in the warehouse, he is now happy to lend at 7%, which compares to 50% plus, the informal credit channels that they have to pay. So, but I think there is something that has been mentioned continuously, market linkage. Many startups tend to act there, right? Waycool is one, Leaf is another, working with the farmer, reducing the link, the middlemen in the supply chain, so the farmer gets more. And I know Waycool pays cash when the invoice is raised by the farmer, which is, cash is king. Why is, Ganesh, you and I spoke of, why livestock is so attractive. It's cash. It's daily cash in the case of milk. And even though sometimes it's financially at the NPV level, not very remunerative, daily cash rules. So I think, if any catalyst, whether it be an NGO, a startup, or a corporate, or typically set of organizations working together, it helps even organize the farmer-producer organizations, right? It's very difficult for a set of small farmers to organize themselves. But if a catalyst can come outside and lead through market linkage, etc., to organize them, then I think, you're shifting the equilibrium, and then things go on very positively, hopefully.
Thanks, Mridula. Again, within FIC, where I also have a role, we also try to look at some of the startups who work with a technology mindset, but to address the social issues, and agriculture is one of the prominent areas that we also work on.
We should talk offline then.
Sure. And now I move towards Sohani sir. Sohani sir, basically, as Mridula also showed the graph with the number of rainy days going down, you also spoke about various interconnectedness within the smallholder farmers having issues on livelihood. Do you think it is very important for us to have a climate lens while we are designing or executing, say, some large-scale rural livelihood programs, mainly focusing on smallholder farmers? And if there is any specific example that, say, BIF has done it at a certain scale of having a climate lens to the program, and when we are applying a climate lens, how do we also ensure that the community understands it in a very simpler manner for them to lead it and take it ahead? So some such examples from your side, sir, would be very helpful to understand.
Yeah, sure, Ganesh. I think the climate lens is unavoidable. And with COVID-19, what is happening, I think that there has to be a combined application of a climate lens along with whatever COVID-19 lens you want to call. And I think the two connect also. So going back to what I was saying about the situation of the smallholders and the challenges they face, I talked about labor productivity, but there are also a lot of related challenges. When you have small holdings, when you have low labor productivity, you also need mechanization, but you don't have the solutions right now. Right now, the farm mechanization solutions are very large scale. We need solutions for smallholders. And they are there. In the world, they are there, but we have to bring them and apply it here in India. Then for a smallholder, the market access becomes a problem because individually it is very difficult. Aggregation is a must. And now, with just as SHG has made a great contribution to the problem of microfinance, I think FPOs are going to make a big contribution to the problem of aggregation. And I think that will be one way by which the smallholders will be able to overcome the problem of individually dealing with the markets, but at the same time also make it possible for them to move up the value chain. I think in the value chain, it is important that the farmers ultimately are able to move up at least a few steps. So on the one side, we have to shrink the value chain. On the other side, we have to help them move up, and that is what will make a difference to their situation. But now this situation is complicated by the vulnerabilities, and climate change has brought about a lot of accentuation of these vulnerabilities. That's why a climate lens is very important. Those vulnerabilities have come because of, as I said, extreme events, change in weather patterns, but also because of not only the abiotic stresses, but also biotic stresses. The incidence of pests is growing. The incidence of, the way to tackle these changes in the weather patterns is required. And on top of it, because of global connectivities, there is global market fluctuations, which is also adding to the vulnerability. So something happens somewhere in the another part of the world, and it immediately affects the market price. The milk price in India is affected when there are pile up of milk powder in other countries, in Europe, so on. So it is something which cannot be avoided in the present juncture. But when we apply the climate lens, there are also, we have to look for solutions to that. And then there are a number of solutions that can emerge when you start applying the climate lens. For example, one of the things that we see is that the whole production system has moved very strongly towards mono crops, So it is very single specialization, whereas what we are seeing, and we have experienced that in BIOF work, is that if you diversify the farming system, if you diversify the cropping system, if you diversify the farm so that along with crops there is also a livestock which plays an important role, then the diversification itself is a very good hedging against climate impacts. So you are making it possible for different produce coming out of the same farm, which is available at different times of the year, and therefore you are probably able to take care of some of the vulnerabilities which are arising. So when you have the climate lens, which talks about extreme events, which talks of change in weather patterns, then the solution of diversification also emerges, which becomes a very, and BIOF has developed the whole approach of Wadi program, which has now become almost like a national program, which brings in agroforestry into the farm. So it brings not only forestry, but also horticulture along with agriculture production. And that is something, introducing perennials into seasonal cropping systems makes a tremendous change to diversification. Similarly, BIOF has been working a lot on cattle development. And as Mridula was saying just now, cash flow is very important. And milk is the best way of getting a very uniform cash flow throughout the year. And that is the reason why there is so much of dependence or importance of milk in a farmer's economy. And if you make that a part of the farmer economy in a big way, then you are taking, see, animals are much less vulnerable to the climate effects than crops. And therefore, when you have a dairy husbandry integrated with the farm, it is not a diversification which is only providing hedging, but also providing a solution which is more climate resilient. So these are ways in which, and of course there are other things. For example, we need to move to other types of seeds because we need better seeds which will come in these type of climate variability. And we have experienced we have seen that out of all the agrobiodiversity conservation that we have done in the remote parts of the country, in the tribal areas, and we have been able to identify land races which are excellent even under difficult climatic conditions. And the farmers have seen it. What they were actually growing earlier, they have seen it is even relevant now, and all that. So there is a way, there is a lot of work possible on soils to improve the quality of soils, to improve the carbon in the soil through increasing microbial population. And then the soil becomes a means to improve production as well as to mitigate climate effects. So, you are handling both together, and that makes a lot of difference. One last point I would like to make is, apart from these solutions which are for resilience building or solutions which are for mitigation, I think there is a possibility now to create a new paradigm of development. And that new paradigm of development will be based on a lot of decentralization of economic activity, not only decentralization, what Alvin Toffler calls demassification. The whole industrial revolution post-development in the world was towards massification of power, of energy units, of manufacturing goods. All that was in massification mode. Now there is a possibility of demassification. New technology is emerging. We saw this COVID. There was this face shields that are being used now everywhere. A lot of these face shields now are being made using 3D printing, and there are people who are doing that. So different manufacturing technologies are coming. A biomass-based economy is now possible. A knowledge-based economy is now possible, where IT can play a very important role. And all these things are going to make a possibility of a very different paradigm of development, sort of putting the last 70 years model of development on its head and creating a different model of development, which will be more decentralized, which will be more dispersed, which will still be giving higher standards of living, which will be more sustainable based on renewable resources, and that will create, that opportunity is there. And all this opportunity is going to be further, made possible because now with the COVID, there is a return migration. A return migration is a backflow of talent. It is a backflow of experience. It is a backflow of skills into the rural areas. So I think when we look at the reverse migration and the COVID-related problems, they are the problems. The first glance tells us that it is trauma and tribulation. But if you have a second glance, you will see that there is a lot of piling up of problems, like the pseudo-employment in agriculture. But that pseudo-employment in agriculture increase with all these new paradigm possibilities. Actually, if you put a give a third glance to the whole problem, I think we can look at it as a beginning of rebooting of civilization. And that Alvin Toffler also wrote a very nice book called Creating a New Civilization, which will harness these new renewable energy technologies, which can be decentralized, IT, which can be dispersed, and manufacturing, which can be dispersed, and still you are connected with a knowledge network, which can make possible global functioning. And I think that is the opportunity we have. So we have a problem, but let us look at it as a possibility, to create a new, use the opportunity for a new paradigm. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. We would now take some questions because we have overshot our time by about 3 minutes. Viraj, if you can help me because I can't see the questions which are coming on.
Sure, Ganesh. So Ganesh, the first question is from Indu Murthy. She asks, there is now reverse migration of a large population who at some point in time migrated due to other environmental, social crisis or agriculture failure. The reports indicate that some percent of this population may not come back with the extended COVID restrictions. Given this, there will be stress on rural resources. What possibly could be possible livelihood and income opportunities given agriculture, particularly rain-fed agriculture, is already bearing the brunt of climate variability, water shortage, market disruption?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Sohani sir, would you like to take this question because you just spoke briefly on this? But if you would be helpful if you can take it.
Yeah. Yes, there is a problem because of the reverse migration, and there is going to be a period of adjustment. But we have to look at, we did a survey in a number of clusters, almost 100 villages, we did a survey to look at the migration. And we found that there were almost half of the migrants were graduates. We found that almost 15% of the migrants were trained in vocational skills. Now, it is very unfortunate that still they were going into the cities and they were doing unskilled labor work. But when they are coming back, this is the pool of talent and skill that is coming back to rural areas. So now, right now, we are looking at the possibility of how there can be skill-based, non-farm opportunities. We need non-farm because people have to be taken off farm, off agriculture, but we need that in rural areas. So we need non-farm opportunities of livelihoods to be created in rural areas, and that is possible in supply chains, that is possible in farm mechanization, that is possible in information services, that is possible in value chain activities. So all these sectors, that is possible in renewable energy. So all these sectors can really take a lot of people from out, and those who have come back from reverse migrants, they can probably play an important role of spearheading these changes. But we need, of course, a catalyst, as was being said earlier. We need a good catalyst who will make use of this opportunity to bring all these things together.
Great. And one is hoping the system would actually be that catalyst to do this. That's the hope that the larger environment has. So Viraj, if you can, I actually am not able to see the question. So.
Sure, Ganesh, no problem. So one of the failures of agricultural interventions has been that farmers are treated as a homogeneous group. How do we ensure that current and future interventions are contextual, local, and conscious of farmer typologies? Is there a role for data and technology?
Thanks, Viraj. My request would be to Vidya to take this point because she talked about Rajasthan, then Orissa and Tamil Nadu. So again, different typologies, different geographies. And do you as an organization look at data, which also gives a lot of insights for implementation or action? Vidya, if you can please answer that.
Yeah, I think, most of the organizations we've worked with have been very savvy, at the community level in terms of really accessing, not just about, so for example, if I look at the Pragati model is what, or the Vritti model is what they call farm and village. Level of data that is actually gathered, not only in terms of land holdings and access to water and But really looking at it from that point of view and then aggregating that data at some point at the district level, so there is a better conversation with the right officials at the district level, around many of the issues that that farmers face, particularly around market linkages, pricing, credit, as Mridula rightly pointed out. I mean, big issue of credit. So I think this is happening very much from all the organizations which have, because they've been around for some time, and there's a great degree of sophistication in the work that they've built. But having said that, I think there is still a lot more need in terms of sharing this data across districts and across states, because I think it will enable, and I think one of the questions you had, when we chatted yesterday, was really collaboration, and that collaboration will happen once that data sharing also starts. Our desert, for example, not only practice but also data starts getting shared across the board. There is a chance that other arid regions across the country will a significant up in terms of practice. So I think it's not only just data gathering, data sharing and collaboration is also very important.
Thanks a lot, Vidya. We'll take one last question because we'll have to wrap up. Sorry, again, over to you, Viraj, if there's any question.
Yeah. So another question is, building out a thriving rural economy requires investments in resilient infrastructure and entrepreneurial opportunities. Is there a role for rural youth and women to play there?
So I think partially Sohani sir responded to that question. But Mridula, if you have some thoughts in terms of the entrepreneurship and the startups that you are looking at or supporting, whether they actually can play a role of creating, say, micro entrepreneurs in a rural area to basically look at both the supply and demand chain vis-a-vis technology or services going to the rural area, as well as them contributing to the urban areas as well. So some thoughts on that would be helpful.
I think what is the problem in my opinion, in rural economy is opportunity, right? And that's especially acute for smallholder farmers. And a lot of the startups that I have access to, and many more in the agri-tech, do precisely that, right? They act as a catalyst to organize farmer-producer organizations, usually in conjunction with an NGO, right? So this is a system coming together to create the opportunity. And the hope is once that access is sparked, you set off a virtuous cycle, right? One thing that is my opinion, and not just my opinion, a lot of opinions, is the bottleneck, the stumbling block, the hurdles for that is there is tremendous lack of competition in rural markets. So, one of the forced reforms that has happened there is the APMC Act has gone away in some of the states, just because it needs to, it didn't work, right? So the mandis weren't open, so farmers bypass that. That's a useful, shotgun marriage kind of a reform that's coming up. I think, a lot of the subsidy structures that we have in the country today almost overwhelmingly accrue to the larger farmers, right? And that creates an unequal playing field. That may be something to look at also. So for instance, something I mentioned was the electricity subsidy. Bore wells are almost entirely owned by larger farmers, right? So the electricity subsidy creates a very unequal playing field. If you take that out, I think, then smaller farmers become more competitive, then these farmer producer organizations start getting more bite. But I think, there is a lot of entrepreneurial opportunity, but you need to open up markets. If the government goes and says, I will buy only paddy and wheat and sets an MSP, there is very little opportunity. There's very little incentive. When I was talking to farmers in Punjab, they said, Madam, why would we do that? Why would we grow vegetables when I know, my state does a fantastic job in procuring paddy? But now they don't have migrant workers. So this is something I really want to put out there, that if any entrepreneur wants to go into Punjab, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. If they don't have migrant waivers to do the transplanting of rice, they have to go for something else. And this can really, be a good catalyst.
Thanks a lot, Mridula. With that, I would basically we'll end the session. Sincerely thanks to Mridula, Vidya, and Sohani sir for their thoughts and comments. It's basically also getting recorded, so we'll also share the points that we discussed. And if there are any further questions, we'll basically maybe share it with you separately on emails to get your thoughts and inputs, and then respond back to the people who have actually put the questions to us.